a small amount of space. So we even know that workplaces have tables in places like lunchrooms. And also tables are able to be placed indoor and outdoor, so we have a lot of flexibility. We also know that the table tennis community in New Zealand is strong. We know there's a lot of people interested in playing. There was a young people survey conducted by Sport New Zealand, which showed that 45% of boys and 35% of girls were interested in participating in table tennis, and that we had to come up with some way of better engaging with those people.
Well, let's go around the panel first, Shane. Who loves the game of table tennis? Catherine?
Well, I used to play in my intermediate. There was one in the classroom.
Oh, did you?
So every morning we'd come in and play table tennis, and I think I got to be quite good, but that's a very, very long time ago.
Alan?
We've got a table tennis table downstairs, yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
You see, addictive.
Yep.
It's funny because when we brought this up, Shane, my producer said that you see this in the streets of Barcelona, and the popularity is quite something to see. People really, they run to the tables. What is it about table tennis that you just gravitate to it? You want to pick up the bat and ball.
Absolutely. I think actually we have a very long history of loving table tennis in this country. It's my experience that a lot of people have a table in their garage or at their batch, and everybody seems to have played at some level at some point in time. I think it's something to do with being able to exercise your whole body, the hand-eye coordination, and needing to deal with spin on the ball and understand the effects of spin.
Oh, spin.
It's definitely something that a lot of people are very competitive within their workplace or
are you a
within their
spinner?
family. I love to put spin on the ball. Yeah. Absolutely.
Same. Just finally, so what is the state here? Where will they be available, and where can we find out where these tables will be?
So we've started the project initially in the Auckland region. We have 25 venues that are placed in public parks, schools, shopping malls, libraries and community centres. And all of those are available on a free app that we've developed. The name of the app is Seekapong. So that's Seekapong.
Seekapong, yep.
Seekapong, that's available from the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. So that gives you access to where all of the venues are. Initially starting out in the Auckland region, and we've got a vision to take this throughout the country by partnering with various table tennis associations and organisations.
Oh, I feel like a game now. Hey, Shane, thank you very much for being with us. That's Shane Warbrook, from the Auckland Table Tennis Association. But, what a game.
One problem, how do you play outside?
Wellington.
You must have, in Wellington, impossible, can't be done.
You need a weighted ping pong ball.
Is Shane still there? Good question, Catherine. Catherine Robertson and Alan Blackman, thank you very much for your time. I'm Ross Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, Haere Nei, is the country's piggy bank half full or half empty? The government books are opened ahead of the election. Grant Robertson joins us to discuss rising unemployment, debt and the road out of the red. New Zealand's COVID death toll rises to 25 after one family suffers its second death. A driver is dead and 2 people are in hospital after a bus collided with a train. Calvin Davis defends the way he's carved up the Tourism Recovery Fund, and a scathing review of last year's measles epidemic, which hospitalised more than 500 children aged under 2. National unveils its $800 million health plan. And is Banshee the husky really a menacing dog? The Nelson City Council thinks so.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Me ngā pitu kōrero ko Anna Thomas tēnei. The grieving family, who has now lost 2 members to COVID-19, are urging people to take the virus seriously. 54-year-old Nigel Te Heko died yesterday afternoon at Waikato Hospital's intensive care unit. He was a revered Raukawa leader and historian who lived in Tokoroa. He contracted the virus from his older brother Alan Te Heko, who died 2 weeks ago at Middlemore Hospital. Their nephew, Chris McKenzie, says his uncle Nigel dedicated his life to the community.
It's difficult to know where to start with Nigel. He was such an important and integral part of our family, our everyday life, our community and our tribe. He has literally dedicated his life to the service of his family and others.
Nigel Te Heko's death takes the number of people in New Zealand who have died with COVID-19 to 25. A review has found a failure of contact tracing, vaccination distribution and leadership marred the response to last year's measles outbreak. The Ministry of Health has released the findings on the epidemic that hit the country last year. 700 people, mostly children under 2, were hospitalised. South Auckland GP Api Taliamatonga saw the increase in cases and was surprised it took health authorities so long to get the message out.
That lack of a coordinated approach to tell all of us, what you're seeing is real, there's an outbreak, this is what we need to do.
South Auckland GP Abe Talimatonga. Tourism operators say government criteria and advice prevented them applying for funding to save key attractions. The Strategic Assets Protection Program has been under fire from the industry for its selection process and criteria, labelled by some as confusing and misleading. The Able Tasman tourism operator R&R Kayak is among those who did not apply, as the owner Rohan Haskell didn't think his business fit the criteria. But Mr Haskell says he isn't sure how his operation will survive after most of his competitors received funding. The Security Intelligence Service is looking into the huge leak of data believed to be used by China's intelligence service. The data leaked from Xinhua Data is said to contain personal details of 2.5 million people around the world, including politicians, their family members, judges, business people, journalists and criminals. Almost 800 New Zealanders are featured on the list, including Jacinda Ardern's mother, father and sister. The director of the Security Intelligence Service, Rebecca Ketteridge, says the information appears to be primarily drawn from publicly accessible sources. National's finance spokesperson says the government shouldn't try to sugarcoat how dark the economic outlook is. The pre-election Treasury update shows the economy didn't take as big a hit as expected from the lockdowns. But the picture for the medium term is more gloomy than initially predicted, due mainly to international uncertainty. Paul Goldsmith says the level of public debt is substantially worse than National anticipated, and the government should be honest with New Zealanders.
What we've seen is one of the most dramatically bad previews in the history of the country since we've been having them. It shows a shrinking economy, rising unemployment and deficits as far as the eye can see, and the absence of any clear plan.
Paul Goldsmith says the National Party will release its fiscal plan later this week. Senior staff from Fielding High School say they immediately rushed to the scene of a collision between a bus carrying students and a train this morning. The bus driver died and 7 bus passengers suffered minor to moderate injuries in the crash near Bunnythorpe. The chair of the School Board of Trustees, Alan Bartlett, says the school community is shocked by the accident and feel for the family of the bus driver. It's 5:04. In sport, former gymnasts say the independent panel reviewing the culture of gymnastics New Zealand is ill-equipped for the job. The panel is headed by sports integrity expert David Howman and includes former Silver Ferns captain Leslie Nichol and former international gymnast Rachel Vickery. Roger Mortimer of the Athletes Federation, which is representing some of the former gymnasts involved in the review, wants a different approach to address years of abuse.
We don't believe this should be treated as a straightforward traditional sports review. We believe this is a human rights and child protection issue, and as such needs the specialist expertise and attention. and input.
Roger Mortimer from the Athletes Federation. All Black hooker Dane Coles has confirmed he'll head to Australia for the Rugby Championship, but understands if some of his teammates opt out. The All Blacks are to spend 9 weeks in Australia from October, including several weeks in quarantine. That could lead to some players pulling out, given the amount of time it will mean they're away from their families. Dane Coles says that's understandable, but he won't be among them.
I've got 3 kids. I'll be on that plane out of here. Everyone's probably at an individual basis. Like, it's our job. Like, we've got to go over there and we're playing for the black jersey, and sometimes it takes a little bit of sacrifice.
All Blacks hooker Dane Coles, and that's the news.
A data set linked to China's intelligence service is full of New Zealand politicians, judges, diplomats, community leaders and senior public servants.
This is profiling of people who are of interest because they're in the public sphere.
These are security issues.
That gives me great concern, and I'd like to hear from the Prime Minister on exactly what she can tell me.
Am I disturbed by that? Yes, I'm horrified by it.
Big Issues. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty mainly fine. A few showers about Northland clearing, some low cloud tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, also Waitarapa. Fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and patchy drizzle developing. Severe gale northwesterlies in Wellington. Marlborough and Nelson mostly fine. High cloud tomorrow with showers about Nelson Ranges. Severe gale northwesterlies in Marlborough tomorrow. For Buller and Western, showers turning to rain with heavy falls tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago, Fiordland and Southland, scattered showers but fine in Canterbury and North Otago. Rain spreading north tomorrow with snow lowering to 500 metres, then easing to showers in Southland and Otago later. Severe gale westerlies in exposed places at times. And for the Chatham Islands, showers clearing this evening, then mainly fine. RNZ National, it's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Welcome to the show. Tonight, the government opens the books and there's a long red road ahead. Grant Robertson will join us later to explain. But first, tourism operators are demanding a review of the controversial government fund that new papers show was nearly scrapped before it got off the ground. The Strategic Assets Protection Program has been under fire from the industry for creating what they see as an uneven playing field. Now, briefing documents show it was riddled with problems, and ministers appear to have dismissed official advice designed to make it fairer. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Helicopters Nelson wasn't holding out too much hope for receiving funding. Under the fund's criteria, businesses had to be a key attraction, nationally or internationally recognised, and generate significant spillover benefits for the region, which they were then scored on. But its chief executive, Pete Darling, says it was a bitter pill when they missed out by 1 point.
It's potentially the difference between us making it through or not. It's not about making a profit, it's about just keeping our heads above water, and the government help or grant would go a long way to making sure we were there when we do eventually have some international tourism again, or tourism in general. So potentially it's the difference between us being there and not.
He says it's not just the company that could pay a high price for missing out.
We provide assets for the community in the way of having assets available for firefighting. We have a contract with FENZ for motor vehicle accidents and moving the jaws of life and cutting gear to motor vehicle accidents. None of that's retained. That's all provided on the back of us making money out of tourism. So that's a huge thing. Potentially the community will miss out as well.
Pete Darling wants to see the selection process reviewed. West Auckland-based tour company Bush & Beach has been operating for 36 years. Its managing director, Ben Thornton, says they were overlooked for funding because Auckland was treated as one big region.
So if you looked at West Auckland as a sub-region or our region, then we would have qualified. For example, we are a key attraction in that area. We are responsible for significant visitation into Piha. We take over 6,000 people a year into Piha. We do generate significant spillover benefits to that region. I think we calculated about $78,000 in spend alone, let alone employing locals as our guides.
Kapiti Island Nature Tours Managing Director John Barrett says receiving government funding, including STAP and the wage subsidy, kept his business afloat.
Absolutely, and our business relies on maintaining our staff. We've got a great team, and for us to be able to say to our team, look, we want you back and we can afford to have you back for this season, and they can make firm plans. It just enables us to go forward with a bit of certainty that we didn't previously have.
More than 300 businesses applied for the fund, with about 130 approved for support. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has now released ministerial briefing documents on the decision-making process, including discussion in July on whether to scrap the fund completely. It also shows ministers were urged against cap grants of up to $500,000 based on concerns they will create perverse outcomes. However, 3/4 of the successful applicants received the maximum amount, and some got even more. Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, says the ministerial briefings paint a concerning picture about the fund.
The papers suggest confusion, uncertainty, frustration with a program that was being developed in a rush, and it kept changing direction. Initially, there was as few as 10 businesses that might have been supported, then 30, and then 50, and then the officials recommended scrapping the program entirely and providing support in other ways.
Yolanda Foal from Hellyview Flights in Cromwell sent an Official Information Act request, questioning why they missed out. She wasn't happy with the response.
From that, it sort of transpired that they didn't really look at our case. They just looked at our size and discarded us from the word go. We didn't get an opportunity to explain our case.
She has joined a group of dozens of South Island operators seeking answers from Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis, and hasn't ruled out heading to court if they don't get them. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Earlier, I spoke to the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis, and asked him if he stands by his funding decisions.
Yes, I do. We went through a robust process. We had the criteria on the MB website. Everybody could see what the criteria were. And in the end, ministers, the tourism recovery ministers, we had to make decisions, and those we did.
So what concerns did officials raise with you about the fairness and integrity of this scheme along the way?
Look, as I said to you the other day, Lisa, we deliberated long and hard as tourism recovery ministers. We had numerous bits of advice from officials, but we believe that the criteria were open and transparent. There were 3 layers of scrutiny in terms of decision making, and the decisions we made, well, we have to stand by them.
Yeah, but my question was what concerns were raised with you by officials about the fairness and the integrity of this scheme, because there were a number of things they raised. So what were they in a nutshell?
Oh, look, there were a number of issues that were discussed, but ultimately that is what we have to do. We have to use our judgment to weigh up advice against a range of different priorities, and otherwise, look, we'll just have bureaucrats running the country, not elected representatives.
So did you ignore the red flags that they raised with you?
No, we didn't ignore them. Doing nothing was unacceptable to the tourism recovery ministers. We're going to help directly protect up to 3,000 jobs in the industry through this program and help support local economies around the country. And like I say, it is the job of ministers to use their judgment, and we weigh up the advice, against a range of different priorities. And like I say, otherwise we just have the bureaucrats running the country. But, we had to adapt.
So any mistakes, Minister, any mistakes that may have been made or any exceptions that were made to the rules, they are tolerable in your view because that was better than just standing still?
Well, we didn't do what you just said we did. We followed the criteria. As I said, there were 3 layers of scrutiny. And like I say, we have to weigh up the advice that the officials give us. And, ultimately
let's look at some of the detail
then.
Let's look at some of the detail, because the detail matters here to the people who are unhappy with the way this has unfolded. Discover Waitomo, AJ Hackett and Whale Watch Kaikoura, they were approved for funding outside of the official application process. How is that an even playing field for all the applicants if you had already chosen these three to get funding before you threw open the doors officially for everyone to apply?
So the Tourism Recovery Ministers had the mandate to consider applications outside the formal application process. These, we were
So how is
informed
that fair?
Well, as I said, we were informed that these businesses were going to fall over if we didn't consider these urgent applications. So, we used that facility. We had that mandate. And like I say, the 83 jobs that were going to be lost through AJ Hackett, we decided that we needed to protect those jobs. Now, AJ Hackett's, the staff there, some of the training they have takes 3 years. I mean, the person who ties the rubber bands to ankles, that takes about 3 years to train, and those people could have been lost to AJ Hackett. Now, when the tourism comes back and those people aren't there, to be honest, as a visitor, I'd like somebody who's had 3 years training and a number of years experience than someone who's just been in the job for 3 weeks.
All right, so that example...
jobs.
That example of AJ Hackett, they applied on the 2nd of June. That's according to the papers that have been released to us. And within about 48 hours, via email on the 4th of June, they were told that they had the money. I mean, what due diligence was there done in that time? 48 hours?
Well, like I say, that we were informed that they were going to fall over imminently. There were
so you took their word for it. The due diligence, I just want to be really clear on this. The due diligence was trusting everything that they put in their application and what they told you. That was the due diligence?
So officials went through the application and had the discussions, but like I say, 83 jobs in their instance were on the line, and so we made the decision. And like I say, we had the mandate to consider applications outside the formal application process.
So when applicants were required to have exhausted all other funding options, what did that mean to you? So were they supposed to sell other assets they might have or other businesses, or if they owned a house, were they expected to try and refinance that? What did you mean by exhausted all other funding options?
What applicants needed to do was put in an application, and then we would go through, or the officials would go through their applications. And if they chose not to put in an application, well, that's a business decision that they made. But it was over to us to go through the process and either accept or not accept. And
okay. But I'm specifically asking, Minister, about that requirement, which is in the application, that the tourism business who is applying must have exhausted other funding options, right? So in the AJ Hackett application, under that section, have you sought other financial assistance? It said they had approached their bankers, but, quote, no response to date. So that's not exhausting all financial options. They were waiting on an answer, and you rubber stamped, $10 million plus in financial assistance before the bank had even got back to them.
So what businesses need to do was put in an application. The officials would look through the applications and decisions would be made. But like I said, AJ Hackett was one of the businesses that said that they were going to fall over and 83 jobs would be lost. So we made an urgent decision.
How well do you think you vetted these applications and the information provided to you? Because you mentioned these 83 jobs. What checks did you do that those jobs were actually in jeopardy and that no other business offered the same kind of trained workers? Because your officials advised that because of the speed at which you were wanting these businesses to be approved, they were using a, quote, truncated process that relied on a high level of trust. So you were rushing these people through, weren't you?
There were 83 jobs on the line and we needed to make a decision, and so we made that decision. Now, people can criticise, but at the time we were thinking there's 83 jobs. AJ Hackett was a business that is synonymous with Queenstown, and that if it was to fall over, I mean, you just need to ask Jim Bolt. AJ Hackett is a business that is used to promote Queenstown, and that it could have negative effects on the Queenstown area. So
what was
we had
the
to
logic?
Make these
what was the logic in giving money?
Under pressure.
Yeah, what was the logic in giving money to enterprises that are owned by parent companies with significant assets and resources? What was your logic there?
Well, we had to take the applicants or the urgent applicants at face value, and like I say, in that instance, there were 83 jobs that were imminent, and that AJ Hackett is a business that is synonymous with Queenstown. So, we had to make decisions, and we did, and we have to stand by those decisions.
Is it an even playing field?
Well, the criteria were applied evenly, and, it was up to businesses to apply. And like I say, we had 3 layers of scrutiny, peer-reviewed, moderated, and the decisions that we made were the decisions that we made. I mean, doing nothing was not acceptable, so we had to make decisions. And look, that's the role of the ministers. As I've said to you earlier, it's our job to use our judgment, weighing up the advice against a range of different priorities. Otherwise, if we just left it to bureaucrats, we'd have unelected representatives making the decisions and running the country.
Are you worried that this could end you up in court?
Well, look, we've received letters asking for information and documentation. We haven't received a letter about judicial reviews.
Are you worried that it could end up in court?
No, because I think that the process that we followed was transparent. It was applied fairly. We had the criteria, we had the layers of scrutiny, and then the tourism recovery ministers made the decisions.
And that is Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis there. It is almost 22 minutes past 5. Toku mai, ko tu whakahoki kōrero. Do send me your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send me an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealand's emerged from this year's lockdown better than expected, but it's a much gloomier picture for the longer-term recovery, with the country facing years of large deficits and ballooning debt. The government's opened the books for the traditional pre-election update, and it makes for grim reading. House prices are predicted to keep rising, but that's raising concerns about the widening inequality gap, with more and more New Zealanders heading for the unemployment queue. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
COVID continues to wreak havoc on the New Zealand economy and will do so for years to come.
This will be a long journey because we have had to borrow significantly to protect New Zealand businesses and households, and we now have the Treasury's forecast that while we're doing better here in New Zealand in the short term, the world is going to do worse in the medium and long term.
New Zealand posted a $23.4 billion deficit for the last financial year. That's expected to balloon to more than $31 billion this coming year before starting to recover. Finance Minister Grant Robertson wouldn't put a time frame on when the country might come out of recession and get the books back into the black.
I was clear 6 months ago tomorrow that we would be in recession, and I'm sure we will be. How far and how deep that is, we'll see the first indications of tomorrow.
The Treasury estimates are based on some limited international travel late next year, with the border remaining closed until January 2022. Grant Robertson says not to read anything into that date. It's just one chosen by Treasury for its modelling.
It's not based on any policy from the government. It's very hard to put a specific date on that because of the unpredictable nature of the virus.
The National leader Judith Collins says the forecasts make for dire reading and the country needs strong government focused on growth. She says with the country looking at 15 years of deficits, it won't just be people's children, but their grandchildren paying the price. She says Labour's response is just to tax and borrow more and add more welfare.
No government ever taxed its way out of a recession. This is a really serious time. The only way to get out of it is through growth, a positive attitude about what can be done, and understanding that everyone is going to have to pull together to grow the economy.
The housing market's expected to weaken slightly in coming months, then take off again in the next 3 or 4 years. Grant Robertson says there's still a lot of uncertainty around house prices.
But quite clearly part of the monetary policy response that we've seen from the Reserve Bank is their view that they need to continue to keep interest rates low and keep a very accommodative monetary policy in order to stimulate the economy. The housing market is receiving some benefit from that. I do acknowledge that.
Judith Collins was asked whether a rising housing market was always a good thing.
Well, I think the market has its way of sorting it out, but I'd also say this, is that if you can't afford a house, it's too expensive.
She says Australia is outperforming New Zealand and the pressure will come off the market when people start heading across the ditch.
We're not only going to see a big drop in activity, but we're going to see a loss of skilled people as soon as they can shifting to Australia, because they will be in a far better situation to get jobs, good incomes and having a future that doesn't involve welfare.
Nationals indicated it wants to repay debt faster than Labour, and it will look at its goal of getting it back to 30% of GDP within a decade in light of today's update. Grant Robertson says National will have to decide what it's going to prioritise.
The National Party is caught in a, Bermuda Triangle style fiscal situation where they both want to increase spending, reduce revenue and dramatically reduce debt. You can't do all of those things at once credibly.
ACT leader David Seymour says it's clear public debt, unemployment and economic growth will be worse once the government and Reserve Bank funded sugar hit wears off. He says the long-term outlook has deteriorated.
The government strategy of spending up large with cheap borrowed money now is not a sustainable approach. A sustainable approach, and you see it in the different forecasts the Treasury has put forward, is to be smarter about public health and allow real activity to return.
The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says it's worse than expected.
So we've got a lot of soul searching to engage in, and there's no time for risks and wasteful spending. Everything's got to be focused on getting our economy turned around now, and those requirements mean that exports, running a smarter economy, the infrastructure growth and the investment in the Provincial Growth Fund are fundamental things to turn this economy around.
And there'll be more figures out tomorrow, those measuring economic growth or contraction. No good news expected though, with everyone bracing for confirmation of a recession, and the worst quarterly result, negative 16% is Treasury's pick on record. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A bus driver has died and 2 people remain in hospital after a bus crashed into a train this morning outside of Palmerston North. The collision, which occurred 2 kilometres south of Bunnythorpe, was taking students to high school. KiwiRail says the train driver was sounding their horn when the crash happened. Harry Locke and camera operator Dom Thomas report.
4 ambulances and a rapid response unit arrived on the scene of the crash just after 8 a.m. They were joined by the fire service, the police and KiwiRail. Police Senior Sergeant Phil Ward says the first thing they did was set up a space for the bus passengers, who were mainly school students.
The students had all departed the bus. The residents had come down to support those students. They'd brought blankets and towels with them to help them.
The incident happened at the intersection just behind me, where Cleverley Line crosses from Railway Road. And the bus pulled in off of Railway Road, where it hit the tail end of a single-engine train. 41 people were on the bus at the time. That's including the bus driver, who sadly passed away at the scene.
The public bus was travelling towards Fielding High School, where the majority of passengers were headed. Senior Sergeant Ward says school staff arrived at the scene shortly after.
We also had the school teachers and counsellors from Fielding Ag High School attend, and they helped with the process of when the parents arrived to connect everybody together.
The headmaster of Fielding High School did not want to be interviewed, but the chair of the School Board of Trustees, Ellen Bartlett, says the whole school community has been shocked by the accident. 7 people in total have been admitted to hospital. 5 have been discharged after suffering moderate to minor injuries. 2 remain in a stable condition on a ward. The Mid-Central DHB's Chief Medical Officer, Dr Kelvin Billinghurst, says the hospital went into an emergency response. ED was cleared out and prepared to take in an unknown number of patients.
I must commend the staff, just performed really admirably according to the processes that have been well established in this institution.
Fortunately, the scale of the collision was not as severe as first feared. Shortly after midday, the bus was towed away and driven to Palmerston North. The Mayor of Manawatu District Council, Helen Warboys, describes it as an accident waiting to happen. She says there's a number of dangerous crossings along the route and has been calling for central government to get the road layout changed. The collision is now the subject of various investigations by the Serious Crash Unit, WorkSafe and KiwiRail. In a statement, the Chief Executive of KiwiRail, Greg Miller, detailed some of their immediate findings.
In the last 15 years, there have been no collisions at this crossing between trains and either vehicles or pedestrians, although our records show one near miss when a car crossed in front of a train in January 2011. We manage a priority list for upgrades to level crossing protection, and this location was not on our current plans to install barrier arms. The train driver has told us he was sounding his horn before the collision.
Greg Miller says the train driver is shaken but physically unharmed. He was the only person on board the locomotive, which was travelling from Palmerston North to Whanganui to collect log wagons. The line is expected to reopen shortly. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Contact tracing failed and the vaccination program was too slow to stop last year's measles epidemic ripping through South Auckland, a new review has found. More than 2,000 people caught the disease and 750 were hospitalised, mostly in South Auckland. New Zealand's most likely spread the disease to Samoa, where it became deadly. The Ministry of Health says it wants to learn lessons from the review to help it deal better with the coronavirus. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
Last year's measles outbreak infected nearly 400 more New Zealanders than COVID has. 520 of those hospitalised were children under 2, and 2 women lost unborn babies. The director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre, Nikki Turner, says that never needed to happen. There was a long known about and large gap in the country's immunisation rates.
It was no surprise we got measles back. We did not need to see it. If we'd moved earlier and put more resources and more effort into ensuring that enough people were vaccinated in New Zealand, particularly in groups we knew who had missed out, we would not have had measles last year.
The review released by the Ministry of Health agrees the vaccination gap was a big problem and there was no real action being taken to fix it. But it also finds health authorities were slow to distribute vaccines as the outbreak hit. After bubbling away in the rest of the country, it started to take off in South Auckland in June. But though 40,000 vaccinations were available, only 9,000 were distributed. South Auckland GP Api Talemaitonga remembers the mixed messaging, which the review says confused both the public and the vaccinators.
The DHBs were then telling us, come on, we've got all these doses, you're not using them up. But it was a real uncoordinated response.
And critically, in June, the Auckland Regional Public Health Service no longer had the resources to trace the contacts of all those with the disease, which is 7 times more infectious than COVID. The outbreak then escalated into July, August and September. Dr. Turner says it was an example of a system that had been under-resourced for years.
We had enough for a small amount of measles, but the moment the cases got too big, we were no longer able to contact trace. The world has seen this with COVID. This is just a straight arithmetic argument. When you get too many cases, your health services get overwhelmed.
And the review notes it was the Pacific communities who missed out on the contact tracing, which failed just as the outbreak took off in South Auckland. Dr. Talemaitonga says it wasn't just the resourcing, but the lack of involving Pacific communities in the contact tracing that was a problem. He says that's something that's improving with the COVID response, but was missing last year.
Those that needed it most were not targeted with appropriate messaging. And this is what I learned from COVID. We just really needed to stand up our community and clinical leadership and in the messages encourage our community to get tested.
The review identified poor communication between the service and the ministry and a lack of clear direction. It says it wasn't until the very end of August when the ministry finally activated a national response that the message about vaccination really got out successfully. The outbreak began to slow in October and the last case was January. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the ministry's already learnt lessons for its COVID response.
I don't think that anyone in particular is responsible for the outbreak. Of course, what our accountability and responsibility for is managing it, which we did. We turned it around. We vaccinated a large number of children and teens and others to help manage it.
And another review released today also found problems with mixed messages and leadership when it came to the distribution of the flu vaccine earlier this year. Dr Bloomfield says it's working to improve that and it will be important for a potential COVID jab. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, another death from COVID-19. National unveils an $800 million suite of new health initiatives, including a Pharmac fund for cancer drugs and rare disorders. And the Nelson City Council says Banshee, the husky, is a dangerous dog. But is he really? Tuku mai a koto whakahoki kōrero. Do send me your feedback. You can text in on 2101. You can tweet at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now to get to the headlines with Anna.
Tourism operators say government criteria and advice prevented them applying for funding to save key attractions during the COVID downturn. The Strategic Assets Protection Program has been under fire from the industry for its selection process and criteria, labelled by some as confusing and misleading. Meanwhile, the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis, has defended the funding process when interviewed by Checkpoint. He says the criteria for financial help was open and transparent, with the ultimate call made by elected representatives, not bureaucrats. The Security Intelligence Service says most of the personal information uncovered in a huge data leak believed to be used by China's intelligence services is not new. The SIS says the information is being studied for potential risks and security concerns, but is primarily drawn from social media and news reports. The dataset contains personal details of millions of people around the world, including hundreds of New Zealanders. A review has found a failure of contact tracing, vaccination distribution and leadership marred the response to last year's measles outbreak. The Ministry of Health has released the findings on the epidemic that hit the country last year, in which 700 people were hospitalised. National's finance spokesperson says the government shouldn't try to sugarcoat the dark economic outlook. The pre-election Treasury update shows the economy didn't take as big a hit as expected from the lockdowns, but the picture for the medium term is more gloomy than initially predicted. Paul Goldsmith says the level of public debt is substantially worse than National anticipated. The Director-General of Health has passed on his condolences to the family whose relative died from COVID. 54-year-old Nigel Huirama Tehiko has died at Waikato Hospital's intensive care unit. He was the younger brother of Alan Tehiko, who died almost 2 weeks ago at Middlemore Hospital. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says the death shows how susceptible people with pre-existing conditions are to the virus. And that's the news.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It is time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, Spark today is one of the topics of conversation. It's unveiled a new plan to grow its business over the next 3 years. Anything offering up for the punters?
Yeah, there's some stuff there for them to look forward to. I must say this was a very long investor call, about 2 hours long, and it was a true education in corporate vernacular. We heard about dynamic capacities, radical simplification, test and learn mindsets and maximising core capabilities. But through all of that, the company did manage to communicate its strategy for the next 3 years. And essentially what it all boils down to is to really attracting customers to its company and keeping them as Spark customers. So one of the ways it's going to do that is by making its wireless broadband services more appetising to customers. At the moment,
does that mean cheaper?
At the moment, most people have fixed line connections, but competition is so tight tight in the market that the margins for telcos are actually relatively small. So what the company plans to do is actually lift the lid on data caps for wireless broadband over the next 3 years. And wireless broadband, the attraction there is that, well, the broadband modems, they're movable. You can take them around with you around the house and things like that. So it offers up quite a bit of freedom there to consumers. And they hope that by lifting these caps, they're going to attract 40% of its broadband customers to the wireless broadband. So from fixed connections to wireless connections. The company, interestingly, is also eyeing up the health sector. You might wonder, what is a telco company? What interest does it have there? But they say they want to help the digital transformation of the healthcare sector, which it says is about a $1 billion opportunity at the moment. The company already has a subsidiary called Spark Health, or it's one of the companies it owns. It's called Spark Health, and it's also preparing a new platform to capitalise on this increased demand for telehealth services from people and medical professionals as a result of the pandemic. More and more people having appointments with their doctor via video conference call. So they think this is a real area, a real opportunity for them to capitalise on. So this new platform that they're going to be rolling out soon is going to have a cloud-based system for health providers, and it will also include electronic medical records and health analytics. And I can't forget Spark Sport. It's also part of its broad, wide-ranging product offering. They say they're going to encourage more people to subscribe, and they're going to partner for success. However, they didn't really go into too much detail about some of the sports or that they're eyeing up to looking to partner with. They did mention, though, that sport is a bit of a cloud hanging over that at the moment, especially on the global front. So a little bit of wait and see there. But they say, look, investing in these new growth areas, as they called it, could generate about $80 to $90 million of revenue for the company over the next 3 years. So that's what they're talking up, and the market did respond to it quite well. Their share price was up 1% to $4.80 per share.
Okay. Who says hemp is going to be the country's next agricultural success if regulations loosen up?
Yeah, if the shackles come off. So this is an independent report commissioned by the Hemp Industries Association, and it says the global hemp industry by 2030 is going to be worth $65 billion. It says that New Zealand, here, we're well set up to really take advantage of this global market. We can really carve out a slice for ourselves. It says like the wine and kiwi fruit industries, New Zealand has the capacity to actually develop a high-value, export-driven hemp business. We have a lot of expertise when it comes to plant growth and research. We have a lot of experienced farmers, so they think there is a potential for us there. They say if we did have a fully enabled sector, we could generate up to $2 billion of export income by 2030 and also create 20,000 jobs. And these numbers kind of sound like pie in the sky numbers. How did they arrive at these conclusions? But I should say that they do, the numbers that I've just provided, they call them key scenarios, and they rely on a number of assumptions. And first of all, it would rely on the government reversing existing legislation which doesn't allow for the production of non-medicinal hemp products. So CBD oils and the things like that. They say that there is a booming wellness industry with CBD products. This is obviously not THC products, this is CBD. It also relies on... They also say that reaching these targets, that there has to be continued global demand for CBD products. At the moment, they say the global industry is growing at 30% year on year, which is huge, right? That's unbelievable growth. It's a huge question mark over whether or not that continues into the long term. And also, if New Zealand wants to try and create $2 billion of export income, it would need a significant and coordinated investment to really create a market here that's geared towards international markets, because there's no way we could generate these sort of numbers by just focusing on New Zealand. The author of this report says that other countries have already made moves to liberalise their hemp laws, and they're already beginning to reap the rewards. So if New Zealand doesn't act quick, we could risk missing out.
Okay, interesting. And what's been going on the markets today?
Well, the NZX top 50 is up a third. It's up to about 0.37% by 44 points to 11,814. Our dollar is steady across the board. It's at 67.2 2 US cents, 91.7 Australian, 52.1 British pence, and gold, it's up again to $1,961 US an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. The Finance Minister says he's got a balanced plan to reduce debt and keep services going despite concerning unemployment forecasts. The books have been opened ahead of the election today and they show a bleak outlook with unemployment set to rise to 7.8% in the first quarter of next year, while GDP continues to shrink. Grant Robertson says he's not gilding the lily and there will be tough times ahead for New Zealanders. He told Alex Perrottet, with all the uncertainty, it's unrealistic to make any promises of where the country's debt rate should be.
But at the moment, I think in the conditions we're in now, making those kinds of promises isn't actually responsible. What I know is that I have, over my time as Finance Minister, shown that I have been disciplined. We've reduced debt to under 20%. I remain committed to keeping debt under control, but given where we are in this pandemic, what we can best do is set the pathway that we have and work together to keep debt under control and maintain those public services. More will emerge over time as we get clearer on how the pandemic affects the economy globally, but we will have higher levels of debt and a deficit for some time to come, and I have been saying that since March of this year.
Okay, as of tomorrow, we are officially in recession. I mean, I think we can agree on that those figures are going to come out. It's showing 2 consecutive quarters. So what more are you going to do in this next term? You've promised not to hike any other income taxes apart from 2% of New Zealanders, earning you $500 million. What else are you going to do?
Well, we've already got a program we've outlined of a massive investment in infrastructure to build more houses, to be able to create jobs right across the economy. We're going to be supporting people into work through the extension of the Flexi Wage program. We're supporting small businesses to be able to thrive and move online. We've got a host of programs that are about that. But then we're also looking to the future with industry transformation plans. We're in there now with the agricultural sector, working on an agri-tech strategy that will lift the value of the wages in that sector. We've got a similar one in construction and in the digital area. We have to lift our productivity. We need to be more sustainable. That's why we're heading towards a 100% renewable electricity strategy and backing that up with investments in new technology like the hydrogen economy, which actually will lead to export earnings and will lead to better jobs with higher wages. All that's part of our 5-point economic plan. The tax part of the equation is only ever part of the equation. And yes, we are asking higher income New Zealanders to pitch in a little bit more. When we put all of that together, that is a steady path for New Zealand to sustainably grow the economy and manage debt. But when we're facing a 1 in 100 year economic shock, there's no single silver bullet. Anyone who's trying to sell you that isn't being realistic. I think today we've seen a pathway forward from here that is realistic.
So what are you going to cut then? It's 1 in 100 years. You've got a license here to think outside the Labor square, the paradigm. What are you going to cut? You've shown you've already been willing to cut future years of the fees-free program, right? So what else would you be open to cutting?
Well, look, there's a number of areas where we're going to have to be very careful with our spending, and fees-free is an example that you've given. We also have already, focused, for example, around funding low-income people to reduce the cost for them to go to the doctor, but not having the policy that we went to 2017 with an overall reduction. So we've been showing our willingness to do that, but actually it's about investment more than it is about cutting things. We need to strongly invest in the productive side of our economy and support those quality public services, because that's actually what enables us to come through this shock with New Zealanders both healthy but also prosperous. And so, yes, there'll be areas where we will look to, make sure our spending is of the highest possible quality, but actually investing in our people and retraining and in skills and investing in our businesses and industry will get us through this better than anything else.
You've got $14.1 billion in that COVID fund. It's sitting there. We don't know, do we? I mean, just how much of that's going to be needed to fight COVID. In your own mind, how much of that might be committed to funding these election promises you're talking about?
Well, for the vast bulk of that is there to be used if it is needed to help with COVID recovery, to deal with when we do have a resurgence like we've recently seen.
But you're going to eat into it, aren't you?
we need to be careful about that. It will not be spent unless it is needed. And so, we continue to be disciplined about that. But obviously, we don't know. The world does not know where the COVID journey ends. And so that money remains available to us, but we will very carefully and judiciously use it in COVID recovery.
Have you allocated some of it already to election promises?
A small amount, yes, where it directly relates to COVID recovery. So we announced the training incentive allowance policy at the weekend, which is about supporting people, obviously, during a difficult period and who are out of work to be able to get qualifications, and the extension of the small business cash flow scheme, which again is a direct COVID response. So there are some areas where we are committing it to elements of what our election policy is about, but the vast bulk of it remains on the table to deal with the future of COVID, which nobody can be certain about.
You might have heard we had Nick Mowbray on, it's sort of the, I guess you call him a toy mogul, calling for large corporates who got the wage subsidy and are still turning a profit, and they're paying dividends, to pay that wage subsidy back. Should they do so?
Well, they don't have to, because we set the scheme up in such a way that it was designed to give confidence and cash flow. It was designed to make sure that people weren't laid off. Obviously, the criteria were that people had to stay employed, and so it was about keeping that attachment between an employee and an employer. Some businesses have decided to pay back because things didn't turn out the way that they forecast they might. But for me, it was far more important to get that money out, to give that confidence, to ensure that people weren't laid off unnecessarily. I can't guarantee what a company would have done, regardless of whether or not they're a wealthy company or they're now turning a profit. If people look into their own conscience and decide that's what they want to do, that's a good thing. But they are still obeying the rules of the scheme if they don't do that. Was that clever? I mean, this is all adding to our debt, which is growing, and this is part of the problem. I mean, the wage subsidy is a ventilator, right? I mean, why give it to companies that can effectively breathe on their own? Well, it's a no-regrets approach, and I can't guarantee what those companies would have done. They may well have laid people off regardless of whether they ended up turning a profit. We wanted to protect New Zealanders' jobs, and 1.7 million New Zealanders' jobs have been protected through the wage subsidy scheme. We wanted to deploy it quickly, and I think people appreciated that. And so, with 2020 hindsight, there's all sorts of things that we can say, but I remain very comfortable and proud, in fact, of that scheme, because it did its job to keep New Zealanders in work.
And that was the Finance Minister speaking to Alex Perrottet. The National Party has unveiled an $800 million suite of new health initiatives it's promising to roll out over the next 4 years if elected. The plan includes a previously announced independent cancer agency, as well as a dedicated Pharmac fund for cancer drugs and another for rare disorders. Also on the list, a social worker for every GP clinic and shorter wait times for surgeries. All that on top of regular health funding. But Labor says National can't be trusted. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
In the midst of a global health crisis, the importance of a robust health system has rarely been so clear.
Nothing in recent history has brought about as much global disruption as the COVID-19 pandemic.
Shane Reti is National's health spokesperson, a former GP, laying out his vision for the country.
Our health policy will deliver better care, sooner and closer to home.
For one, that means a new type of social worker, a primary care navigator, posted in every GP clinic around the country. It's an approach used in the United Kingdom, someone on hand to counsel and assist patients.
In fact, many of us figured out they were more important than us as the GP, actually. But they were actually doing a lot of legwork.
A similar program was trialled in Auckland and Northland last year. Community caseworkers, or kaimanaki whānau, stationed in GP practices. The trial was overseen by the health researcher and Papakura GP, Matire Harwood, who says it had major health benefits.
A lot of these people are the aunties in Māori communities who are going above and beyond in terms of picking people up, taking them to the hospital, making sure that the kids are being looked after at home by other members of the whānau. So it would be great to see this funded properly.
National's promising to front up $64 million a year to fund 1,000 navigators to work alongside GPs.
I don't want to be the one who misses a suicide patient. I need to be the one who does a really good job with this person, but look at my waiting list, look at my waiting room. Imagine if it could be that I did that initial triage, identified what the actions were, and then, I'd like you to come next door to Belinda, and she's going to do a deeper dive with you.
But the idea is winning little favour with Labour, and spokesperson Chris Hipkins says it's already rolling out extra support for primary care.
That's well underway now, and that's continuing to expand. Actually, if you look at where the pressure is around primary care, there's a lot of pressure around mental health. I think that's got to be the first priority.
Today's promise is just one of a suite of initiatives being touted by National at a cost of $200 million a year. That's new money for use on new schemes. It comes on top of the regular funding of the district health boards.
We'll commit here to fully fund cost pressures, both supply and demand side.
I think National's track record speaks for itself, which is they generally don't fund cost pressures faced by DHBs, and that's one of the reasons why DHBs are in deficit at the moment, is there's just so much catching up to do.
Labor have spent more on health, and yet I'd make the case have worse outcomes.
The back and forth on health is only just beginning. Labor has yet to release its manifesto. International has a mental health policy planned for next week. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's 6 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know your thoughts on National's health policy or also on the state of the economy. The books have been opened today. What's it like for you on the front line? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Nelson City Council has deemed a dog which attacked and killed a sheep must remain muzzled in public. Banshee, the husky, mauled a sheep in June and was classified as a menacing dog. Its owner today unsuccessfully appealed in having that classification overturned. A warning, some may find parts of Tracy Neal's report distressing.
On the rainy winter day, Banshee, a Siberian husky, was out on a City Hills walkway dotted with sheep. Dogs are meant to be on a leash in Nelson's Stanley Whitehead Reserve, but Banshee's owner slipped in the wet and lost the lead. A person in a house below saw what happened, as Environmental Inspections Manager Brian Wood told a council hearing today.
It was a member of the public who observed Banshee's behaviour and reported her as pulling at a sheep in the Stanley Whitehead Reserve. And she watched as Banshee used vigorous head shaking and attempted to try and drag the sheep, but could not move it, so fed on it where it lay.
The farmer, Andrew Newton, who has managed sheep on council land for decades, says it's not the first time in his farming career he's had to deal with a dog mauling a sheep, and it doesn't get easier.
Yeah, in this case, the sheep was dead, so, we just got called by the dog control and had to just drag the ewe away and take it home and dispose of it. But we knew it was a husky and that they are a notoriously susceptible breed to that. There's a few breeds that are a bit susceptible to chasing sheep.
The council classified the dog as menacing, the lowest classification under the Dog Control Act, which requires a dog to be muzzled in a public space. There are currently 77 dogs on the council's books with this classification. Banshee's owner, Ashley C., who declined to attend today's hearing, tried having that reversed. RNZ was not able to reach Ms. C. In a report to the council, she said,
I have always been very responsible. She is never allowed off leash anywhere near sheep, as I know dogs, given the chance, will chase prey. This incident was a wrong place, wrong time accident.
She went on to say Banshee had no history of aggression and that she was well cared for. In her written objection to the dog's classification, she said Banshee had been booked into one of the country's top dog psychologists. But Brian Wood says the report from behavioural therapist Tammy Wharton did not convince him that the right approach had been taken.
Banshee was not tested for her reaction to sheep when in the paddock with them alone or not on a lead. The report simply outlines that they worked alongside stock, walking through them in paddocks, as well as free running on adjacent paddocks. There's no indication Banshee was tested against sheep in a paddock.
Ms. Wharton declined to comment, respecting the wishes of her client. The farmer, Andrew Newton, says dogs might chase sheep which run in fright, but he's not sure behavioural therapy is the right answer for some breeds.
Quite a number of years ago, a little dog killed a lamb and they sent it to a dog psychologist in Wellington, then it came back and killed another one. So I can't say I've got complete confidence in the procedure.
He says dog owners have become a lot more responsible around stock in urban areas, but unless they take a firm stance with their dogs, they will keep killing.
Dogs have got wonderful memories for things like that when it comes to chasing or killing something, and so, one day your back will be turned and the dog will be disappeared, and, you can pretty much guarantee it'll be back on the job.
City Councillor Kate Fulton, who chaired today's hearing, said Banshee's owner had taken the matter seriously, but they weren't convinced Banshee no longer posed a risk. She said such events are traumatic for any dog owner and for farmers.
We're here to uphold the safety in public spaces and make sure that stock and animals and humans are safe. And in this particular case, we believe the muzzling will work and that is an acceptable outcome at this point in time.
Ms Fulton says the door remains open for a change in Banshee's classification if a further application is made, but until then the dog must remain muzzled in public. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Time for some of your feedback before the 6 o'clock news. A lot of you getting in touch about these strategic tourism asset grants. Minister Kelvin Davis tonight defending how that money was carved up. Some of it went to AJ Hackett. This listener says, come on, ask how 83 jobs, certainly not all tying ropes on legs, get $10 million. How much are they paying these people? And seriously, 3 years to train someone to tie a rope? That's ridiculous. Another listener says, it's not an even playing field. Davey from Wanaka says AJ Hackett has been making large profits for years. The owners are wealthy. There's no way they didn't have the funds to stop the business going under. Another person says, shocking decisions from Kelvin Davis to grant that funding to some wealthy tourism operators when other honest Kiwis are battling.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ko Anna Thomas Tene. The Tourism Minister has defended signing off grants for 3 big-name operators before the government fund officially opened. Funding for AJ Hackett Bungee, Discover Waitomo and Whale Watch Kaikoura was approved before the Strategic Assets Protection Program was opened to other operators. The fund, aimed at saving key attractions during the COVID downturn, is under fire for its selection process and criteria, labelled by some operators as confusing and misleading. Kelvin Davis told Checkpoint that he and the other ministers in charge had the mandate to consider applications outside the formal process.
What businesses need to do was put in an application. The officials would look through the applications and decisions would be made. But like I said, AJ Hackett was one of the businesses that said that they were going to fall over and 83 jobs will be lost. So we made an urgent decision.
And the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has also defended which operators were selected to receive funding. The Security Intelligence Service says at this stage the information involved in a massive data leak looks to be mainly drawn from social media and news reporting. Almost 800 New Zealanders are featured on a list leaked from Zhonghua Data, a Chinese company with reported links to the country's military. Katie Doyle reports.
Those featured on the list include judges, politicians, journalists, ambassadors and some of their family members. The New Zealanders featured on the list include Jacinda Ardern's mother, father and sister, and the former Prime Minister John Key's son. The director of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, says it is reviewing the information for any potential risks and security concerns. But at this stage, the data looks to have been gathered from publicly available sources, like social media and news reports. Call Katie Doyle, TNA.
A challenge to the country's level 4 COVID-19 lockdown is heading to the Court of Appeal. Lawyer Andrew Borrowdale had argued in the High Court that the Director-General of Health went beyond his powers when he put the country into lockdown in March. Last month, the High Court ruled that in the 9 days from March the 26th, the requirement for people to stay at home was justified but unlawful. Dr Borrowdale now says he is appealing to the Court of Appeal. He says the High Court judgment raises vital issues about human rights and constitutional law, which should be assessed by a senior court. A review of the quarantine facility in Auckland where a health worker picked up COVID-19 is underway. The health worker has been confirmed as having the same strand of the virus as a case from the Auckland outbreak who was staying at the quarantine facility. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the case required hospitalisation and was assessed by the healthcare worker. Dr Bloomfield says a clinical team has been at the facility today to review procedures,
so that we can see if there are any lessons to be learned, any changes to protocols, and of course improving our IPC procedures to make sure that the staff there and others in the facility are protected.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. An Otago University staffer wants an apology from senior leadership for the way it's dealt with a proposal to impose caps on preferential entry pathways into medical school. The university has come under fire for suggesting a limit of 56 Māori students a year through its Māori entry pathway. In a recent letter to staff and students, it's now admitted the proposal was a response to a legal challenge and says it will strenuously defend the pathways in court. Professional practice fellow Zoe Bristow says she is blindsided by the statement. The team recovering the Pike River mine has reached the area that provides the best chance of finding clues about what caused the 2010 explosion. Known as Pit Bottom in Stone, the network of 600 metres of tunnels off both sides of the entry tunnel contains electrical equipment and the loader driven by one worker to escape alive. A 6-person team, including the Pike River Recovery Agency's Chief Operating Officer, Dingy Pattinson, reached the area early this afternoon. Mr Pattinson says the tunnels will not be forensically examined for a number of weeks. In the meantime, a team will continue to recover the last 350 metres of the entry tunnel. It's 6:05. In sport, the All Blacks hooker Dane Coles says the Warriors have provided the All Blacks with a blueprint of how to cope with playing overseas amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Coles has declared himself available for the Rugby Championship starting in Australia in October. The side will be away for up to 10 weeks. Coles says he understands if players with young families opt out, but he also has young children, and being back home in time for Christmas was a key to deciding to go.
The Warriors boys, I think they've done it, they've put their hand up and just got on with it and stayed in their bubble, and I think you put all those protocols and systems in place, you can control just a bit more ownership on the players to buy into that and don't do anything stupid that's going to risk the Rugby Championship.
Dane Coles from the All Blacks. Former gymnasts say the independent review into the culture of abuse at Gymnastics New Zealand doesn't go far enough, and they want the Human Rights Commission involved. The Athletes Federation's Roger Mortimer is representing some of the former athletes taking part in the review, which he says has been arranged too quickly.
It's complicated and unfortunate that the initial review was undertaken so quickly without time for proper input from a variety of people. We're really not sure what's going to happen in terms of the existing review and whether it will be integrated or whether something would start again or exactly what would happen. Hopefully we can shed some light on that quickly.
Roger Mortimer from the Athletes Federation. Koina ngā purongo hakinakina.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
So when you're in what they call a controlled environment, it's actually 1 metre. So when you're in a contact traced environment, it's 1 metre. So that applies in gyms and museums and restaurants.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Where I am is in Portland City itself. The air quality is the worst city in the world right now.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and the Bay of Plenty mainly fine. A few showers about Northland clearing. Low cloud for a time tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine. Waikato to Wellington including the central high country. Also Waited Upper. Fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow and patchy drizzle developing. Severe gale northwesterlies in Wellington. Marlborough and Nelson mostly fine. High cloud tomorrow with showers about the Nelson Ranges. Severe severe gale northwesterlies in Marlborough tomorrow. For Buller and Westland, showers turning to rain with heavy falls tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago, Fiordland and Southland, scattered showers but fine in Canterbury and North Otago. Rain spreading north tomorrow with snow lowering to 500 metres, then easing to showers in Southland and Otago later. Severe gale westerlies in exposed places at times. And for the Chatham Islands, showers clearing this evening and then mainly fine. RNZ National, it is coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora, anō. By tomorrow, New Zealand will officially be in a recession with quarterly growth figures expected to tank. But the Finance Minister is looking on the bright side, saying the economy is doing better than expected after the government threw open the books ahead of the election. The Treasury update shows the economy didn't take as big a hit as expected from the lockdowns, but the picture for the medium term is more gloomy than initially predicted, due mainly to international uncertainty. It's forecasting unemployment will almost double, the borders will remain closed until January 2022, and debt will hit 55% of GDP by 2024, up from 19% last year. So what does this soup of numbers mean? Well, Kiwibank's chief economist, Jared Kurt, joins me this evening. Hi, Jared.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. The government's headline in their press release was "Economy doing better than forecast." What's your headline?
Nothing's changed, basically, from what we've seen in the last few months. When we're in the middle of the lockdown, we thought that the economic damage that was going to be inflicted would be much worse. We came out of lockdown earlier and we have been really surprised how spending has bounced back, how the housing market has bounced back. But look, it's a long road ahead. I believe the Treasury's forecasts in the budget earlier this year were rather heroic over the medium term, and they've been revised down to something that looks a little bit more reasonable, and it's going to take us a long time to recover.
So what does that look like? Because basically we are being told that the initial shock was less severe, but it's going to hang around for a bit longer. So what does that mean?
Well, the first thing you think about is how long are our borders going to be closed for? When we were in the original lockdown, we thought, geez, I don't know, maybe a year. So we'd sort of guesstimated around the middle of next year. Now it looks like our borders are going to remain closed well into 2022, possibly 2023. That's a massive change in assumption in itself. The global outlook is also weaker, so our trading partner growth is lower. We're probably going to get lower commodity prices, and just not having international tourism for years it hurts the small open economy.
So that forecast pushing out even potentially to 2023, do you think that's a fair one in terms of the borders being closed?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, until we learn to live with the virus and until we're comfortable in allowing foreigners to come in, the borders are going to remain closed. I don't think there's much debate around that. I hope we get to a point where we can say, hey, look, let's let tourists in, let's let long-term workers in, let's open up a little bit. Anyone who's willing to come here and go into managed isolation for a few weeks. But, it's going to be hard to attract tourists who want to come down here and spend 4 weeks on holiday, but the first 2 weeks is in a cage somewhere.
So unemployment, okay, so that's heading, almost to 8%, which would be pretty much double from where we were, 4%. So what's that, about an extra 100,000 people? Why is that figure going to stay higher for quite a while?
It's the economic scarring. It's the fact that we're losing people in tourism-related industries, and then we're going to have to try and absorb them elsewhere. And I think it just takes a lot of time for people to pivot into new industries and find new jobs. But also we're in a position where we really need to start cranking up and creating new jobs to absorb these people.
So what, cutting down wilding pines and shooting wallabies, not enough?
I reckon that would be a great start for sure, but there's a lot more that can be done. I mean, we're talking a lot about infrastructure, very male-dominated industry, but we need to fire up and think about how we can get more workers into health and education and other areas which I think have been neglected for decades.
So for some people, the scary figures are the debt, right? 55% and then some small change of GDP by 2024. First off, in real cash monies, how much is that?
So the total amount of government debt on issuance was
on issue, was around 70 billion before the COVID crisis, and it's going to increase to about 210. So that's a pretty big increase. But we're starting off with, net debt being around 20%, going up to around 55, as you say. For New Zealand, that's a big move. But for internationally, most countries, just about all developed countries around the world, would love to start at 55%. They're all going to end up well over 100%. So at the end of this, we're still relatively well off and fiscally responsible compared to most countries in the world. The game here is to get the economy up and running and making the economy more resilient, more productive in the future so that it can handle that extra debt. So it's more about getting these projects done, making the economy faster and bigger, so that debt in nominal terms today actually starts evaporating as GDP cranks up in the future.
Yeah, so as a proportion of our gains, it becomes a smaller number. But what is realistic in terms of getting that back to around the 30% mark? Because we have one of the parties, National, suggesting that they could be on track to 30% by 2030. Is that realistic? What number would be if it's not?
Yeah, I'm glad you said 30% because I think 20% was always too low. I actually thought that was a bit irresponsible. We'd been underinvesting in our country. 30% sounds about fair, and look, sure, if we can grow at a decent clip of around 2 to 3%, then 30% is achievable by that 2030 and beyond. And I think that's a good objective.
Okay, so when we get the figures tomorrow, what are your expectations?
Oh, look, it's going to be a big decline. We think it's going to be around 12% on the quarter, which is a staggering figure. I think the stats department, was having all sorts of problems actually measuring the number in such a difficult quarter. What's interesting will be how we bounce back in the third quarter. We're picking a sort of a 10% bounce back, so we've seen some wild fluctuations in the data. Once we've gone through this rough patch, it's how we grow back into 2023, and that's the slow and difficult path to get our economy back to the size that it was at the end of 2019.
I'm just curious, given how we're tracking with debt, and both of the main parties have always said we need to be insulated against a crisis, prepared if something happens, what kind of position would we be in if there was another economic shock, like, not wishing it, but like an earthquake? Are we in a position to handle that?
Yes, absolutely. Even if we issued all that extra debt in the next few months and we had 55% of GDP, we might get downgraded if we then had to ramp up again and go to sort of, 70-odd%. But to be honest, we're in a world where most countries have been downgraded in the post-financial crisis. So we do still have ample ability to ramp up to an event like that.
Hey, I'm not wanting to undercut our entire conversation, Jared, but given everybody says 1 in 100 event, nobody saw this coming, it's a world of uncertainty, can we put any stock in the forecast that we're looking at?
Not a lot, which is why we economists deal in scenarios. So we say this is what our central scenario is, but by the way, there's some chance that there's a better outcome, and there's probably more chance that there's a worse outcome. And even Treasury today gave us 3 scenarios: 1, a better scenario, and 2 downside scenarios. So that gives you the idea of where they see the risks, and it's to the downside.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Kiwibank's Chief Economist, Jared Kerr. The death of 2 brothers from COVID-19 in less than a fortnight has prompted a warning from their family for others to take it seriously. Nigel Hurirama Te Hiko died yesterday afternoon at Waikato Hospital's intensive care unit, almost 2 weeks after his elder brother Alan succumbed to the virus. Catherine Hutton reports.
As news of Nigel Te Hiko's death spread today, so did praise for the kaumātua, historian and leader of his Raukawa people. His nephew, Chris McKenzie, says his uncle dedicated his life to his community.
It's difficult to know where to start with Nigel. He was such an important and integral part of our family, our everyday life, our community and our tribe. He is literally dedicated his life to the service of his family and others.
Iwi Chair Vanessa Iparima described her friend as a wealth of knowledge who never stopped giving.
He did everything. He was part of the treaty negotiation team. He was our historian. He was so generous with himself. He was light and laughter of the party, but also knowledge and wisdom.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, also paid tribute.
Our thoughts are most sincerely with this man's family and friends during a difficult time, and also for his iwi, Ngāti Raukawa, who have lost clearly a rangatira, who was very prominent in the iwi's history, and they mourn the loss of their loved one.
Dr Bloomfield says the deaths emphasise how serious the virus can be if it isn't controlled, a point Chris McKenzie is also keen to make.
We know the reality of how deadly the disease is, how quick it acts, and how uncompromising it is. We would say to the rest of the country that in order to ensure the safety of each other as a wider community, to follow the rules explicitly.
It brings the number of deaths from COVID-19 to 25, giving New Zealand a death rate of between 1 and 2%. Dr Bloomfield says that's about 10 times the death rate from seasonal influenza. At today's news conference, Dr Bloomfield announced officials have also determined how a healthcare worker at a managed isolation facility contracted COVID-19. The worker had earlier been genomically linked to the existing cluster, but it has now been determined they got the virus after assessing one of the cases at the facility.
The healthcare worker went into that person's room to provide care and assess them ahead of hospitalisation. And a review is underway actually at this very point in time. There is a clinical team there to have a good look at what happened in the circumstances so that we can see if there are any lessons to be learnt, any changes to protocols.
Today, there was one new case linked to managed isolation, bringing the total number of active cases to 79. For Checkpoint, call Catherine Hassan-Aho.
New Zealand's domestic spy agency is reviewing the huge leak of data believed to be used by China's intelligence service. The Security Intelligence Service has obtained the information relating to New Zealand that's part of the Junhua database, which contains the personal details of 2.4 million people from around the world. Despite the concern, the SIS says at this stage the information appears to have been collected from public sources like social media and news reporting. Here's our reporter Katie Doyle with today's developments.
Almost 800 New Zealanders and their family members have been caught up in the data leak. Politicians, judges, journalists and diplomats. Among them are some recognisable names: Bulger, Holyoake, Muldoon, Peters, Ardern, Key and Harawira. Despite the size and significance of the leak, the National Party leader Judith Collins this morning wanted to know why she hadn't been briefed by the Prime Minister.
I would expect that any contact with me on national security would come from the Prime Minister. She's the Minister responsible for it, and she needs to let me know if she's got any information to provide to me, because there are other MPs and other parties, obviously including the National Party, where apparently some of our family members, not mine as I understand, have been accessed, or certainly been watched.
But the Minister responsible for the spy agencies, the GCSB and the SIS, Andrew Little, hit back. He says it's not the Prime Minister's job to brief the opposition. If Ms Collins wants to know more about situations involving security, he says, she needs to ask the people who already brief her. His statement has been voiced.
The Intelligence and Security Act 2017 requires the Director General of an intelligence and security agency to provide briefings to the Leader of the Opposition to keep them informed about matters relating to the agency's function. Both New Zealand's intelligence and security agencies meet regularly with the Leader of the Opposition and provide briefings. Government ministers are not part of that process.
Judith Collins has since confirmed she will be briefed. Meanwhile, University of Canterbury China expert Anne-Marie Brady is warning that the data leak could be linked to attempts to influence politics and business here. Her details are among those caught up in the broader data set, even though her name is not on the list of 800 New Zealanders.
This is very concerning. It's happening on a grand scale. There's about 2.4 million names. This is evidence, if any was needed, of the global reach of China's efforts
to use political interference activities as a tool of foreign policy.
Anne-Marie Brady says it's concerning the names of politicians' children and other family members are included in the data.
They can be vulnerable too. They can be targeted, offered business opportunities. This is very much the pattern overseas, or other opportunities, or even for whether they get into trouble, blackmail, you name it.
The Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says it's important not to prematurely overreact to the leak. But he says the government does take privacy very seriously. He thinks the data collection has likely been carried out by malicious state actors.
Well, the assembly of that sort of information is not done for some beneficent purpose. It's done to gain some usually untoward advantage in circumstances where you should not be able to gain it. I don't care what information they got on me, but I do care when families can be manipulated, or members of families can be, and where the objective may be what you would call in our law a simple evil purpose.
The Director of the Security Intelligence Service, Rebecca Kitteridge, says while it is reviewing the information for any potential risks and security concerns, most of it appears to be drawn from public sources, such as social media and news reporting. She says it is a timely reminder for people to check the security settings on their social media accounts and review how much information they are sharing online. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
It is almost 24 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Former gymnasts have cast serious doubts over the review into abuse allegations at Gymnastics New Zealand. The organisation commissioned an independent review in August after a series of allegations about abusive practices. It's being led by sports integrity expert David Howman and former top athletes Leslie Nichol and Rachel Vickery. Athlete advocate Roger Mortimer is representing some of the former athletes who have taken part in the review. He told sports reporter Felicity Reid it lacks the expertise it needs.
We don't believe this should be treated as a straightforward traditional sports review. We believe this is a human rights and child protection issue, and as such needs the specialist expertise and attention and input. And as such, we reached out to Paula Tesoriero and her team at the Human Rights Commission for their expertise, input, leadership and direction. We've also reached out to some leading youth sports human rights lawyers internationally for their input as well. I guess in a nutshell, we believe this is a really important piece of work and it really needs the specialist expertise that it deserves.
Given that the current review is underway, and I think it's about like a month away from completion, what the athletes or what you guys are looking at now with the input from other sources, will these two things tie together, or do you think that it needs to be a separate and additional review?
It's complicated and unfortunate, isn't it, that the initial review, I guess, was undertaken so quickly without time for proper input from a variety of people. So, we're really not sure what's going to happen in terms of the existing review, whether it will be integrated or whether something would start again or exactly what would happen.
I understand that some of the athletes had approached Gymnastics New Zealand wanting terms of reference to kind of change. Is that related to the Human Rights Commission and to that extent of it, or is it related to something that was already being undertaken?
Sort of related to sort of feelings of what people that have been through the system, I guess what their experiences had been and I guess what their guts were telling them about what should be in place. And I think this is where this divergence has taken place. I think this has been set up as a traditional sports review. And I think in the back of athletes' minds, they realised that it didn't feel right. I think it wasn't really until we, discovered the path through human rights and child protection that people got clarity. So, in terms of dialogue with Gymnastics New Zealand, I think it has been about slowing the process down and taking a step back and just doing it properly and getting the right expertise in. So, and I think it should be recognised this is an evolving process for everybody. This is a learning curve, I think, for all parties involved. This is a new area and something like this hasn't been conducted in sport, I don't think, in New Zealand before. So there is an element of, of coming up to speed for everybody.
And that was Roger Mortimer speaking to sports reporter Felicity Reid. Gymnastics New Zealand Chief Executive Tony Compierre says they've spoken to the Human Rights Commission and the discussion was constructive and confidential. He says they look forward to further discussion once the Commission has gone back to the Athletes Federation and Athletes Group. The mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, says the city will pay $12 million to the family of a black woman killed by police 6 months ago. Breonna Taylor was shot 8 times when officers burst into her home during a drugs investigation. Chris Dignam reports.
I'm deeply, deeply sorry for Breonna's death.
Louisville, Kentucky Mayor Greg Fisher on Tuesday apologized to the family of Breonna Taylor, a black woman who was shot dead by police in a botched raid on her apartment in March, and said the city will pay $12 million to the Taylor family and implement new police reforms.
My administration is not waiting to move ahead with needed reforms to prevent a tragedy like this from ever happening again.
While the settlement was accompanied by reforms, it did not explicitly admit wrongdoing on the city's part. No police officer has been criminally charged over Taylor's death, but Kentucky's Attorney General Daniel Cameron is expected to bring the case before a grand jury this week, and Lenita Baker, an attorney for Taylor's family, said she was confident an indictment was coming.
We are not going to stop our calls to hold the officers responsible for Breonna's death accountable. We're going to continue to put pressure on the Attorney General's office to present a fair case to the grand jury, and we're going to wait. We know that indictment is coming from the grand jury. We have faith that indictment is coming from the grand jury.
Also representing the Taylor family was Benjamin Crump, a civil rights attorney known for representing black victims of police violence. He told reporters that the $12 million settlement appeared to be one of the largest of its kind in the United States.
Lanita, I believe it may be the largest amount ever paid for a black person in a police shooting. We're still trying to verify that.
Breonna Taylor's death, alongside that of George Floyd, gave rise to one of the largest protest movements in U.S. history.
It's only the beginning of getting full justice for Breonna.
At Tuesday's news conference, Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, said it was now time for the officers involved to face criminal charges.
Please continue to say her name.
And she encouraged demonstrators to continue fighting for justice.
And that report was from Chris Dignam. Let's get to some of your feedback before we head off on the tourism funding and where it's gone. John from New Plymouth says it's stupidity to grant $10 million to bungee jumping when there are virtually zero tourists to jump. This logic extends to Wales too, he says. Just crazy logic from a minister who hasn't performed this past term. And another person says the funds given out to tour operators were not fair or valid here in Queenstown. All of those businesses are run and nurtured by the wealthy slick ones who know how to milk the system. And to top it all off, their trustees and shareholders are also among this district's most wealthy. Thanks for your feedback. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Homes have been evacuated as a large grass fire burns near Mahia Peninsula in northern Hawke's Bay. 8 fire engines and 3 helicopters have been fighting the blaze. The Tourism Minister has defended prioritising grants for 3 big-name operators before the government fund to help tourism operators officially opened. The team re-entering the Pike River mine has reached the area that provides the best chance of finding clues about what caused the 2010 explosion. And the number of confirmed coronavirus infections in India has surpassed 5 million, the second highest in the world after the US. Our next news and weather at 7.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of sleep and the odd things we sometimes do when we're having it. In honour of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, this week's Hump Prize is Scotty and Stacey Morrison's book Māori Made Fun, and a chat with Imperial College Professor Samantha